The Money Show. Personal finance.
Warren Ingram, personal financial advisor, executive director at Galileo Capital. It's Valentine's week. Did you get the roses?
I did. Thank you so much.
Well, excellent. I'm glad you got them. Cut the heads off. You know what that means, don't you? Now, listen, we're talking couples and money, and I think we need to set the mood. We know candles. We've got candles. No chocolates. We're not allowed to eat in the studio. Nice music. We need nice music. Romantic music.
Just for me. Hair back.
Hey, blowing it off. I just thought, what is the cheesiest music I could do for a romance? And that was Loving, a terrible sitcom of the 1980s. It was revolting. But now listen, I mean, this is quite serious because more and more people are sort of hooking up, shacking up, doing whatever it is they do instead of getting married. Maybe they'll get married one day, but kind of marriage is quite an outdated concept, and it comes with lots of legal nonsense and family pressures and all sorts of stuff. And so people move in together, and they're not necessarily thinking of the financial consequences of doing that before they actually move in, and it can be messy.
Exactly, and I think it's. I mean, park the I guess the moral or religious arguments to one side, but a lot of people would say, well, you would test drive a car before you buy it, etc., and so we're going to move in together and see how it goes, and then if it goes well, we get married, and it's probably in the beginning, in the early stages of someone moving in together, they keep their lives fairly separate, but a year or two or three down the line, almost organically. Things start to merge, both financially and I guess in a range of different ways. It becomes practical to say, well, if one of us is doing the grocery shopping more than the other, why don't we have joint bank accounts?
There's no such thing in South Africa as a joint bank account. South Africa it's the most despicable failure. I don't know if it's a banking system thing or a regulatory thing, but you can't get a bank account in a couple's name or in two different names.
Sure. But I guess I'm saying, practically that we open a account and then we chuck all our money in there. And,
but still, it's antiquated, and I'm shouting at the banks. Bad banks.
Bad banks. But you're taking me off track now. See, I'm losing my train of thought. Right? I'm a male. I can do one thing at a time. So what happens is they start to merge their finances, and I think without malicious intent or anybody doing anything strategically to derail a process, that's just what happens, and then eventually it progresses to. I mean, I think the sad ones are, for example, we've got space. Why don't we buy a puppy or a cat, and then why don't we buy a house together, and all of those things are great. Until the relationship falls apart, or tragically one of the two parties passes away in an accident, something unexpected, and then all of a sudden the complexities that they've created for themselves by trying to simplify life really just hit them, like a ton of bricks.
I mean, if you've got young people, for example, in a relationship, and one of them owns a property, and there's no will in place, for example, for their partner to inherit the property, and naturally that property then goes to their next of kin, who might be siblings or mum and dad or whatever the case is, and you find yourself homeless as a result of the fact that through no fault of your own and through nobody's intent, you're excluded from inheritance on that particular basis.
And especially if you for example contributed to the bond and contributed to the maintenance of the property and the rates and taxes, etc., over a period of time, you just end up with no legal basis to stand on, or you're going to have to really fight it now if there's not an amicable way of splitting things. But even if there is, if the will says the property goes to the parents, then if they say, well, hang on, you're entitled to half of the value of the house, they effectively have to donate that to you. So they then become liable for donations tax.
There's a tax implication.
So there's a major tax implication. So it becomes quite complicated very quickly. And I think to me, a lot of that stuff we can simplify quite easily. Like everything in life, unfortunately, somewhere along the line you need to document the stuff and write it down and get a proper agreement in place. But so it's certainly not to say that you've got to keep your lives completely separate all the time. It's just a case of saying that you have to have a proper agreement in place.
Who are those guys who do contracts for virtually everything? Horters, don't they? I mean, could you get a Horters cohabitation agreement? Are they that progressive?
I don't know Horters at all.
They're part of Bidvest, and they do basic contracts for sale of assets and things. I wonder if there's something like a cohabitation agreement in Horters. But it's probably not a bad idea to say, go and see a lawyer. Hello, we're so much in love. Let's get a contract.
Yeah, and I mean it's something that we would tell people to do before they get married. We would say go and get an antenuptial contract and make sure that everything's documented. And so the same when you move in together is at least just have a cohabitation agreement in place that specifies all the stuff. Especially if you're going to start merging your lives, which I almost think is inevitable.
And then at some point, I mean, the relationship will either go down a serious path and there'll be a commitment. There doesn't have to be a marriage. It becomes quite complicated, though, in terms of things like estate duties, in terms of you cohabiting, and the property might be in one name, not the other name, and the cohabitor leaves the property to you in their will. What happens with donations tax and inheritance when you're not legally married in the 21st century?
Yeah, so as of this week, because I suspect it might change next week, but at the moment, if a husband leaves everything to his wife, there is no donations tax implication in that. But if it's a couple and they have no legal marriage, then if one party leaves a portion of the assets to the other party, then they'll be subject to donations tax, and you can't get away from that. So it's something to note and to know about going into the deal, because what you can do is, for example, buy the property in joint name. So you can still do that, Bruce. You can't have a joint bank account. But again,
Kukesh wants to fight with me on this particular point. Kukesh in Sunning Hill, you can have a joint bank account in South Africa?
Yes, you can, Bruce. And
where?
You can have...
Why has it been kept so secret from my wife? Because she's very angry with the entire banking industry that we can't do this.
Or you can definitely have a joint bank account. I know many people, you might want to approach the banks and get a joint account.
No, but a bank account in both people's name with equal access, equal rights, equal signing power on the account. Not an account in one person's name with signing rights of the second person. Because, yes, it's not a direct joint bank account.
A joint bank account, absolutely. With two cards associated with it. A joint bank account. But
the account is in one person's name and there's a second signatory to it. It's a small thing, Kukesh, but it's not a fully equal 50-50 partnership in the bank account. One person carries the liability for that account.
Sure.
Okay, so it's not a joint bank account, Kukesh. It's a second card in an account.
No, I'm not talking about a secondary. So you could have your account, and you can get a secondary card to that account.
Mm-hmm.
That's separate. That's completely separate. That's your account, and you can just get a secondary card to your spouse's account, to your account, and then you can have a joint account.
Kukesh, please tell my producer which bank you work for. I'd be very interested, because I've looked. I've sniffed around. Maybe it's just, when I go and ask questions in banks, people look at me strangely, like, why would you want to do that? Is it important to keep separate bank accounts? I mean, here I am wanting to put everything into a single pot because I'm such a good person and that's just the way it should work. But would you counsel against that, Warren?
Yes, always. And
King
from
of
the
romance,
yeah. and even long-standing married couple, with no prospect of on the horizon of divorce or anything. It's just very simply, for example, if you do have a joint account, let's assume that they exist, and all your affairs run through that account. What happens if one of you passes away? Because my view is that the bank most likely would be under a legal obligation to actually freeze that account for a period of time until there's a letters of executorship, etc. And so now the surviving spouse is now left without access to money. So I would always say that you should definitely have individual accounts with a reasonable amount of money in both your names, so that the one person can continue and function while the estate is being wound up.
And also just basic consideration, things like life insurance and stuff. I mean, you are in a serious relationship, in a permanent relationship. It might not be marriage, but if one of you does disappear off the face of the earth, there's going to be a period of disruption and upheaval and dismay. Don't make it worth somebody's while to have you bumped off, but be considerate.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice one where going back to your property example, where one partner owns the property, and if the other person, let's say, is contributing to the bond, and they're not in any kind of legal marriage, then at least make sure that the person who owns the house, that there's a life policy on that person's life, and that the other person is the beneficiary of that, because then you have none of the issues of worrying about a will or going through the probate process. It's a straight contract. The person's passed away. There's a nominated beneficiary, and you get paid out, and you can make it to the value of half the value of the house, etc., or a larger amount, etc. But I think, to me, that would be one of the ways of simplifying what could be an enormously complex situation in the event of death, of course. If it's just a breakup, then you need that cohabitation agreement.
Warren Ingram, ever practical, but we're not going to play the music again because it's not very romantic. Warren Ingram, he's a financial advisor. He's an executive director at Galileo Capital. Very sensible, good guidance if you're shacking up.